Okay, welcome back, guys. In this video, we're going to go through how to just do an auto retopology for your creatures. Now, a couple of things to note with this method is that we've kind of already been doing it throughout the sculpture. So we're simply just going to do a Z-remesher. Though in our case, depending on the complexity of the model, how good of a result you want, there's a few extra steps. Now, what I've done here in the subtool palette, I've just duplicated the sculpture and I've just renamed it to sculpture _ auto retopo. And if I press Shift F, I can take a look at the wireframes. Now, there's a couple of things that we do have to consider when we're doing this method. First thing is that we just no doubt going to have a higher model in terms of poly count than what we would have if we were to carefully retopologize this manually. And secondly, we're going to have messier topology. So this auto retopology method is decent and it will get us there in terms of being able to unwrap it, texture it, and just do what we need to do to get a final illustrative piece out of it. But it's going to be high poly, it's going to be fairly messy. So it's not trying to find the perfect auto retopology. You'll probably not be able to do that. It's more about finding what's going to be good enough for this process to work. Now, there's a few areas on your model that is most likely going to break, or you probably want to spend most of your time ensuring that it's pretty decent. That's around the eyes. So eyes is an area that's going to have a lot of trouble. In particular, as soon as it sort of folds into an eyelid and goes inside the head. So that's an area that always has a bit of trouble. So we'll pay attention to that. The nostrils and the mouth area is quite complex. So that area tends to fail quite easily. So we'll make sure we take a look at that. And other areas that tend to have a bit of trouble sometimes are things like the fingers, especially towards the end, and toes as well sometimes has a bit of trouble. So we'll pay attention to that as well. Now, for most of you guys, depending on how complex your model is, you can probably get away with just doing a simple Z-remesher. And I'll say only a few of you could get away with that. Most of the people in a class will probably need to do some sort of extra step to make sure that the topology is flowing in some sort of decent direction. Okay, so I'm going to get out of my wireframe mode, and what we're going to do is we're going to create lines everywhere. So we're going to paint these lines across our model, and we're then going to convert those lines into polygroups. And if we go down into the geometry menu and find Z-remesher, you will notice there's a couple of things that we can do here, and that is to keep groups. And there's another one, but it's more to do with this slider here, so curve strength. Keep groups will basically, as you retopo, we'll do the Z-remesher. ZBrush will keep the groups, the polygroups that we create. So as we sort of paint, so as we paint something like this, if we were to create a polygroup like that and press Z-remesher, ZBrush will keep this polygroup. That's not so important, but what's important when this happens is that ZBrush will also follow the edges of the polygroup as you Z-remesh. So the flow of this circle here will be sort of adhered to. So the topology will sort of go up and around and in a circle. So knowing that, what we can do is paint a bunch of polygroups everywhere in order to sort of dictate the flow of topology and get a pretty good result in the end. The other thing that we're going to be using as well to help is your Z guides or Z remesher guide. So it's BZR down here. And this allows us to paint these curves on our model. And what ZBrush will do, depending on your strength, is that as you Z remesh, ZBrush will look at the direction of these curves and follow the curves to try to make the topology flow in that direction. So that's something that we can use. So there's two things, polygroups and curves. And the way we're going to make the polygroups is a little bit different to how I just showed you, where I just sort of painted an area and press Control W. We're going to use a plugin in the Z plugin section called Polygroup It. And we're going to use this function here. So it says polygroup it from paint, borderless. So what that is basically saying is that if we were to create a series of lines, ZBrush will read those lines and then convert those areas into polygroups. So to get started, what we're going to do is just scroll down to Polypaint, and we're going to start by pressing the colorize button. So there's color on here already because I was playing around with the color. So if you have any colors, just make sure we're set to white and press fill color. Okay, so what we're going to do is change the brush. So you can use the standard brush or you can use the clay build up. I find either one of these guys work pretty well. Although the standard brush, we do have to change the alpha. So in this video, I'm just going to use the standard brush and I'm going to change the alpha from this soft alpha to alpha 58. So this is a really hard edge brush alpha. It's down here as well. And this will give us some really hard edges. Now we don't want to sculpt anything. We just want to lay down some color. So up here in the toolbar, instead of pressing Z add, we can press that to turn it off. So we're not adding any sculptural detail, but we can just only allow it to add RGB details. So color. So right now I have white turned on. Nothing's going to happen because the model is white. So if I change the color to black and start painting, you can see I can paint black in this model, on this model. Okay, so before I get started, the active poly count is quite large to begin with. So 61 million, that's definitely a bit overkill. And it's probably not necessary to have it to start off this high. So I'm just going to go maybe one down in my subdiv levels. 15 million, that's good. We can still get a lot of resolution with this. Keep in mind that ZBrush is a vertex painter, meaning that the higher resolution, so the more points you have in your mesh, the more crispier that texture will look because it's painting on the vertice directly. So if you have a really low poly model, you might want to subdivide it a couple of times, because what we need is not a soft edge like this. We need to adjust the focal shift all the way to the left so we get a really hard edge like that. So if you adjust the focal shift all the way to the left and you press as hard as you can on the tablet, or if you're using a mouse and the edge is still quite soft, then you want to subdivide. And that will give you a crispier edge. Right? It just gives ZBrush an easier time to recognize that this is where we want to create those poly groups. Okay, so I'm going to delete higher. So delete higher because 4 is fine. And then I'm going to start painting some areas. Now you don't have to paint, if you look at sort of like sectioned off areas of face of the topology. You don't have to paint every single section. If you do, you'll probably find that it'll more likely not work. So you don't want to go crazy with this, but you want to be able to dictate the flow in particular areas. So like I said, the eyes, the mouth, especially the nose, we probably want to focus on that a little bit. And these little guys here, so on my warthog type character, these sort of features I want to be able to sort of isolate so the topology flows in a circle around the ears and definitely around the body, so the arms and joints where things sort of bend. I want to add a polygroup because when we zero mesh, ZBrush will look at that and make sure that there's a line flowing in that direction. Okay, so I'm going to isolate this just by going down here into the vertical toolbar and going to solo. And up in my stroke, so up in the tool menu bar, so stroke, I have lazy mouse turned on, so I'm going to pop that to the side. So just to make this a little bit easier, I'm going to reduce the lazy steps to maybe 0.1. So it's repeating a lot faster so we get a nice smoother sort of line. And increase the radius so we can sort of get some smoother lines so it's not so jaggedy. I'm going to make this smaller, but not too small that ZBrush can't see what it's looking at. So that is probably a good size. Okay, so let's start off by isolating some of these areas here. Whoops. So I'll start off with the eyes. Now I'm going to try my best to surround the eyes or the borders of the eyelid, but I'm not too worried if it's not exact. Right. So let's just come up to here, and I might increase the lazy steps to something a bit higher. So let's go 30. Because I am using a mouse for this, and I want to be able to get some nice straight lines. Okay, so something like that. Make sure you have symmetry turned on. And I'm going to make another one as well. So let's just keep going with that. This one I'm going to make a little bit more rounded. Now, if you make some mistakes like this, all you have to do is hold down Alt and you can get rid of that. So I'm going to paint white in here instead. And I'll swap the colors around. So now if Alt should get rid of it. I don't know why that's not happening. Anyways, what I can do is just switch the colors. So I do notice sometimes that happens where Alt doesn't really work. That happens, you just got to paint white in. So ZBrush is just looking at the colors and just seeing the contrasts of the poly paint, and then it's going to make a selection based off that. Now, if you want to quickly turn lazy mouse off, the hotkey is L, and what I'm going to do is just tidy up this edge a little bit like that. Okay, so that should work, I think. And let's move on to the ears. I'm going to put lazy mouse on. And I'll just work my way around. Okay, you don't need to be too accurate at this stage. What we're more or less doing is just kind of telling ZBrush, hey, in this area, try to follow a more cylindrical pattern as it comes to here and around the eyes as well. So we can get a nice sort of fold or topology around the eyelids. So that will do. And then whilst we're here, let's do the neck. So I want to make sure that ZBrush is making a line over here around the neck. So I'm just going to draw a straight line all the way down to the front. And we want to make sure that the line is completed the whole way through. So if you're going over little lumps and things, you just want to make sure that it is indeed going through and there's no gap there. Just look around, and up here we'll complete that. Okay, so that should work nicely. There should be a nice line there. Now I'm going to do these parts. And I'll clean that up just by switching the colors. You should be able to hold Alt. I don't know why mine's not working. And I'll just tidy that line up a little bit. Okay, so that's done. And then I'll do these ones over here. Like that. And then for the mouth, I'm going to go around here. So not directly on the lips, kind of around the edges. And a lot of this is experimental as well. So you kind of have to go through a trial and error process to get the look that you want. Or, you know, it's not going to be perfect, but you can get it pretty close depending on your model. Now that we might have some issues here. It's a bit close, so we'll just keep an eye on that. But let's just move on. And I'll just come down here. Okay. And then let's just draw some circles on the nostrils. And then we'll go over here as well for the edges. Great. So I think this should work pretty nicely. I'll just do some more around the neck. Sort of connect that back here. And then we can start connecting some of these guys together. So these guys, let's bring that over. So we get this whole piece here. I might connect these two. Turn off lazy mouse for a sec. And then down here, let's connect this like that. And I think I'll just let ZBrush sort of work out this area here. We'll see how we go. Then up here, we can connect these two pieces so we get a nice straight line here in the retopology process. And then let's connect it from here to here. So this area here, ZBrush is going to create a polygroup out of that, out of this, out of these little circles, this bigger circle, the inside circle, and the ears as well. And then all of this area here. Okay, so I think that might work pretty well. Again, it's hard to tell without actually doing it. So we'll just move on and then we'll see if it's going to be an issue or not. So we'll get the arms. So let's draw a line around there. Let's see. So something like this. I'll make that a little bit nicer. what I'm going to do is just isolate this part because the body is getting in the way a little bit. Just make sure. Okay. Then we'll do the wrist as well, because we want to make sure that there's a clear line right where we're drawing this black sort of outline. And we should get the fingers, although I probably won't do that for this video because it'll probably take a while just go through each finger. But you definitely want to do that just around here, so the base of the fingers should just be enough. You don't need to do each sort of knuckle. Okay, so I'm going to do the knees. And it's a bit like that. And I'll clean this up. Okay, and then do the ankles, or whatever this is called. Okay, and yeah, you do want to do all the toes as well, so you just want to start off on about here, circle all the toes, but I won't go through that right now. And then we'll do this area here. So sorry, I'm getting a bit close to his bits, but I have to get in there. Okay, so something like this. Let's work our way around. That, and then we'll get right in the middle here. Now I know that's the center line, so I'm just gonna bring my cursor until they sort of snap together. You can sort of see the two red dots snapping. So now what I can do, if I click and then hold down shift, you can see that there's a green line. It sort of snaps to that line. If I let go of shift, it will draw a straight line for me. Now I think that should be fine. Although if I wanted to, I could come into here and sort of tidy that up a little bit. It might be okay though. ZBrush might be able to see that and just know what it's supposed to do. And then let's grab here. And again, apologies for the view, but I need to be able to get in here. Okay. So the topology is a bit loose around here. You can see we're sort of stretching it a bit and it's becoming a little bit pixelated. So something to keep an eye on over here. And we definitely need to have some around the shoulders. So we'll get in there now. It's going to be a bit tricky to get in there because it's a bit tight in the armpit area. But what I'm going to do is just isolate this and just start drawing. So I don't need to get right in the corner here, like right there. I'm just going to go sort of under it a bit. So I'm going to get rid of some pieces that are in the way. So Okay, and then we'll just meet up over here. I'll just clean that up a little bit. Okay, so I think that might be enough. I'll let ZBrush sort of work the rest out. If we find that it's just getting a bit too loose around here, we can make some more sectioned off areas and try to control it a bit more. You know what, let's just do that now. Let's just add some more bits to it. So I'll sort of split off this area here. So make sure lazy mouse is turned on. Like this. Make sure they're connected properly. And then we'll do the side of the body. So I'm just going to hold down Control, Shift, and Alt and remove the arm for a little bit. So I can just get into here. Just draw a straight line right down like that. Make sure these bits are connected. Okay, so let's see how this works and see if it gives us the results that we want. Now, before I do that, I'm just going to quickly save it. So Control S and let's give that a save. Great. Okay, so let's take a look. Now, I'm going to press Shift F. So we want all of these sectioned off areas into separate polygroups. So we can go to Z plugins, polygroup it, and then we want to press this one here, polygroup from paint. So let's press that. It's going to do its thing. And you can see that some areas worked and some areas didn't. So that's okay. What we can do is just press Control Z to go back. And I'm going to delete lower as well. So we're just left with this fourth level. Now, if that happens, you probably want to do this anyways. It's just to scroll down to where it says Polypaint. And then we can just adjust the colors. So I'm going to zoom in here. And where it says RGB contrast, I'm just going to bump that all the way up. And this will make these black lines even thicker. Any areas where it's slightly sort of, opaque or not as thick, it's going to make that really dark. So just press OK. Now let's try that again. So it's doing its thing. Just let it do its thing. Okay. So now if I press Shift F, you can see, and I'm going to turn the lines off by pressing the line button within the polyframe button. You can see that we got all these polygroups. Just double check that all of them have worked. So we've got one here, here, and it looks like it's worked. Okay, so that's good news. So we can turn colorize off now. Now that that's worked, we can turn this off, we don't need that. And then I'm just going to go back to white. Now what we're going to do here in geometry is go to Zero Mesher and we're going to go half and adaptive. But we're going to turn keep groups on and we can mess around with this slider here. So basically what this slider is doing, what it's saying is that how much do you want ZBrush to adhere to these edges, these group edges? Do you want a line exactly where there's a split here? Or if through the Z remesher process, if we need to make these lines a little bit, going more up here, then can we do that? All right, so that's what that's saying. Let's just see how it looks with this turned all the way up. I'm going to turn my poly lines back on because we need to see the wireframes. And then let's just press Z-remesher. It's probably going to take a bit of time, so give it some time to think. Okay, I'm going to pause the video and I'll see you guys once this is done. All right, so we're back and this is the results. So you can see that there's a line exactly where the edge of the poly group is. And for the most part, looks pretty good. It's definitely too high. So we're at 261,000 polygons. But it's holding up pretty well. There's some areas that look a bit shaky, like around here, and over here. It's sort of stretching a little bit, and on the corner of the eyes, it's sort of getting a bit worrisome. But let's just end over here as well. Let's just go with this. So let's press half again. So half adaptive. And let's try this again. So we want to get it fit as low as we can before it starts breaking. We can get it fairly low. And again, it really depends on your model. If you have a pretty simple model, then it'll more or less be fine. That's pretty good. So we're at 117. This area is getting a bit shaky. And over here, there's a weird sort of hole, but that's okay. We're going to Z-remesh again. Hopefully that fixes that up. It's getting a bit weird over here. So let's try that again. Now, we can play with this slider if we want to. Give it a bit more wiggle room. We can bring this down a little bit more. I'm happy to bring this down. So let's go down to about here and then let's Z-remesh again. Same settings. Okay, so that looks pretty good. So bit iffy over here. Not too happy with that. We might be able to go down one more time. I'd say going down one more time would be a stretch. But I think we're going to have to probably leave it here and do a little bit more. But let's just see what it looks like if we were to go down one more time. So let's bring the smooth groups down a bit more. Okay, so decent, but the areas that we really need to have more topology, like around here, it's just too little. It's probably, it might work, it might, probably won't. And over here, we kind of lost that area, so that's not good. Everywhere else though looks pretty awesome. Like around here looks great. Around the armpits looks good. And over here looks great. His junk area, it's not very nice, but we're gonna redo this anyway. So we're at this part here where we probably can only go one more down before it's just we're pushing it. So what we can do is, instead of using the polygroups, we can try to use another method, or another method in conjunction with the polygroups. And that's to use the Z remesher guides. So that's BZR. And we're not going to draw lines like this because that's going to take a very long time. What we're going to do is use the edges of the polygroups to put lines in. So up here in stroke, if we were to go down to where it says curves, oops, not curves, mod of functions. That's right. We can add curves along these three areas. So we want to turn everything off except polygroups. Now if we press frame mesh, it's going to add those curves in on the borders of this polygroup. So this curve strength is basically saying to ZBrush, how close do I have to follow these curves? So right now it's 50%. So it gives ZBrush a bit of leeway if we need to adjust it, or if ZBrush needs to adjust it. So let's try that. Now we can probably turn keep groups off. Let's just experiment with a couple things. So let's start off by keeping groups off, and then let's do half adaptive. So with the guides on, ZBrush knows that it's there and it's going to try to follow that. That looks pretty good. Again, you're not going to get this perfect. So I'm going to press Ctrl Z to go back. Look pretty decent, but you're not going to get it perfect. So you're going to have to compromise at some point doing this method. So let's increase the curve strength to something like 95. I always find that if you go to 100, it just never looks good. So I always go a little bit below 100. So let's try this. Okay, so that's even better. You can see that we're getting these loops here and around here, and we're at 29,000, which is fine. That's perfectly fine. A lot of game models, especially the hero asset within a game, is around 15, 20, 30, sometimes even more. What I'm most concerned with is just the eyes. I want to make sure that that has a nice sort of circle around it. The topology is running in a nice sort of direction. But you know what? This looks pretty good. Not so impressed with this area. It's sort of folding across itself a little bit. You can sort of see these edges. It's going to work. Like, that will work. I just think we could potentially get that a little bit nicer. So we can draw extra lines here if we need to. I'm just going to make a smaller brush size. Just draw an extra line like this. And then let's give that another go. So hopefully ZBrush sees that. You can see that's fixed that up pretty well. It looks pretty good. Let's Ctrl Z, and then let's see if we can add some more lines here. So being pretty careful, I want to add these lines like this, and I can click on this edge to sort of continue on that stroke I made earlier. Okay, and then let's do something like that. Okay, so Z remesher. That's pretty good. Let's do a couple more around the eyes. Now let's try that. You can see that the Z remesh guides have sort of gone a bit wonky. So what I'm going to do is sort of, let's see, let's go into stroke. Let's just delete what we have and just remake that polygroup selection again. Don't know what happened, but let's make a smaller brush and then let's do this. I'm going to put lazy mouse on so we can have a bit more control over a smoother curve. Okay, and then let's get these ones in to help control the lips. And let's get one in here as well. And then let's give this a go. So zero mesher, half, and adaptive. We had better results before. So if I wanted to just get rid of one, I just need to hold down Alt and sort of cross over that edge and it gets rid of it. Let's try a bigger brush size. Now these are sort of getting a bit corrupted. So you just gotta be careful with that. You can see that as I do that, it sort of makes that go a bit weird. So I might just leave it in here. And then let's add other lines down here. And all we're telling ZBrush is just, can you please follow this direction a little bit as you do your Z guides or Z remesher. And again, we have to compromise at some point. So the first sort of iteration of this, where it was crossing over really heavily, that would have worked anyways. We just wanted to get it a little bit nicer if we could. And I mean, we can keep trying if we wanted to, but I think that will be fine. I'm more really concerned about this area here. Now, I'm pretty happy with this. I'm just going to double check everywhere else first. I mean, this doesn't look great, but that will work. If you're planning on animating this thing or rigging this thing up, then you definitely want to do this manually. It's not to say that you can't rig this up. You definitely can rig this up and do some poses with this. But yeah, that will work fine. And that looks pretty good. Okay, so just before we call it, let's just bring back the other one. So the sculpted mesh. And what I'm going to do is just hide everything but the sculpture and the auto retopo. Okay, so I've got these two and I'm just going to do a projection. So let's turn colors off. And I think this is supposed to be 0.25 by default, I think. So let's press project all. Again, this is the area I'm most concerned with. Not really anywhere else. I know everywhere else is going to work pretty much okay. All right, so I just want to make sure this is following this sort of shape as best as it can. Sort of crossing over a little bit. That will work. It's not nice to look at, but that will work. Okay, so let's check everywhere else. That looks fine. We can test this out though. All right, so what we can do is just do a quick test to see if this is going to actually work or not. And we need to do this anyways. So let's just do this now. So I'm going to save this. And then let's do a quick projection test just to see if it's going to work or not. So I'm going to do a quick unwrap. So let's go to Z plugins, and then we're going to use the UV master. It's advised that you work on a clone, but it's a fairly low poly model. We just create a saved. So I'm pretty certain it's going to be fine. So we can just press unwrap. It's going to do its thing. Just let it sort of think. And we'll just double check the unwrap. So we need to do the unwrap first before we project. What we would typically do on the final model is export it out at this stage, unwrap it, then re-import it, and then do the projection process. So this is unwrap now. If I go to Z plugins and UV master and flatten, you can take a look at it. Now it looks great. So that should work nicely. So then let's unflatten this. And then all we're going to do is make sure that's turned on. So the sculpture and the auto retopo. And we can do this in solo mode. So I'm just going to press, I'm going to subdivide it first. So let's press Control D and then let's project all. So we're just going to go through the projection process steps again to make sure that we have all the details that we can grab from this. That looks pretty good. Just worried about this area, right? You don't want any sort of issues with the projection. There probably will be, and I don't really want too much cleanup. But let's just press Control D because we are only just doing a test at this point. Okay, so that looks getting some issues here. So I'm going to bring back the model. So just try to see if we can mitigate this error now before it becomes too much cleanup later down the track. Okay, let's just see how we go. If there's any issues anyways, let's just push through. We just want to test it. Okay, so Control D, and then let's project again. So let's try to get as much detail as we can in this test. And we'll just, test if it works, and if it works, then we know that we can do a proper unwrap. We can then bring it back into ZBrush and know that it's going to work because we've already done the quick and dirty auto unwrap and test bake as well. Okay, so let's take a look. Not 100% of the details back, but what I'm going to do is just smooth this area out. And over here, I'm not too worried about capturing 100% of the details. Again, it's just a quick test, but if I can just do a little cleanup, then that will be worth it. So let's do maybe 2 more. And this one's going to take a little longer. So For the next two projections, I'm just going to pause the video so you don't have to watch this bar just go up. Okay, so I'll see you when this is done. All right, so I'm back and it looks like it was fine. So there were some issues here. So in subdiv 5, some issues over here, but I'm not going to fix that just for this video. So we're just going, this is just purely a test. So any sort of like issues with the projection that needs to be fixed up, we'll do that for the proper one. So over here and over here. But just for this test, that's fine. So let's export all this out. So first off, we can export the lowest subdivision level. So this is the one that we need because it has the unwrap on it. So you can just press this button here, export it out as an OBJ, that's fine. And to export the maps that we need to test this, we can just go to Z plugins, pop that to the side. And what we need is multi-map exporter. Now, just for this, we just need the displacement, and I'll go through that. So this is what it should look like. We're going to export a 4K map for this. So open up export options, and under displacement, we want to make sure that we are set to the right subdiv levels. So we went up to 5. So let's make sure that's up to 5. So what's it going to do is that it's going to look at subdiv level 1 and then subdiv level 5 and take the details and extract that as a displacement map onto our UV map. So this is going to be different. This method of how we get a displacement map is probably the most accurate way to get it, as opposed to what you'll see in like Substance Painter, where you grab the displacement map, or how they do the baking is all ray casting. So this is looking at the different levels of subdivisions and looking at the changes in the surface and then making the displacement map off that, rather than shooting out a ray cast method and then picking up whatever that ray hits. So it's a very accurate method, and you get the best results doing it this way. And this is the way that we're going to do it. So displacement map, Maya's default mid value, and we'll talk a little bit more about mid value soon, but just for this video and just for the test, Maya's default is set to 0. So we're going to keep it at 0. Make sure it's a 32-bit map, and everything should be exactly the same. So yep, so default. So it should look exactly like this. Now, the next thing that we need is normals. So let's open up the normals options. This is what you need. So subdiv level 5, tangent space. Let's smooth out the normals as well. And then with that, just press export, create all maps. So I've already set this up inside Maya. So this is what it looks like. So exactly what we need. It looks exactly like the sculpture inside ZBrush, except what we're working with is we're actually working with just the low poly version. So this is the one that we created, the auto retopology. And you can see here, it looks fine. But what is cool is that with all the maps put on, it looks just like the sculpture inside ZBrush. Now, if you don't know how to set this up, I'll bring over my Hypershade so you can see how to set this up. So it's a fairly simple setup. We're just using a standard Arnold surface shader. And we're piping in just the normal map. So make sure you bring in a normal map node. So you can just press tab and then type in normals. And it's this one here. So this out value needs to go into normals of the Arnold surface shader. Then this file 2 is the normal map that I exported outside of ZBrush. So this normal map here that I exported. The important part here is that in the files node, you change the color space, because the normal map, the displacement map, roughness map, metal maps, and any other sort of utility maps or detail maps, I like to call it, ambient occlusion is one of them as well, shouldn't have any sort of color space associated with them. It should be a raw file. By default, it will come in with some sort of color space like an sRGB. Just open this up, change it to raw. And this is the displacement file. So again, a displacement file is a detail map. So it's not a color map. So you need to make sure that we set the color space to raw. Again, this is the displacement map that we've exported out of ZBrush. You shouldn't need to do anything. So so the out node goes into, the out color goes into this little thing here, and where it says displacement shader, you can just apply this to the model. So select your model, right click, assign material to viewport selection. Okay. These are just my lights and cameras. So I just put a little camera in there, and I just used a Arnold Sky Dome for the lighting, but you can use whatever lights you want. The lights aren't that important. You just need some sort of light in there so you can actually see the thing. What we're concerned with is just making sure that the model is looking like the ZBrush sculpture. So if I put this side by side, now it'll be very obvious if it doesn't work, right? So you'll be able to tell pretty much straight away that it is not working, because it's just completely wrong, right? It just looks completely off. Let's make that smaller. Put that to the side. And put that up to subdiv 5. Give that a little render. And that's our sculpture. That's what it is in Maya. So it's going to look a lot nicer in Maya because we're using Arnold to render, which is a much more advanced renderer than the simple sort of shading render that we get inside ZBrush. But you can see the details are coming across really nicely. The light is hitting the side of the model over here. You can see the skin details that I've been working on. So we just want to make sure that it does work, and yeah, it does work. So I'm happy with this, this low poly model. So this one here, if you want to then use this for your unwrapping, we know it's going to work. So we can just proceed to do a proper unwrap, and we're going to not do a single tile map, which is what you're probably most used to. We're going to do probably a 4 tile map, so a multi-tile workflow. So we'll go through that in class next week. But yeah, this should work. So hopefully you're able to follow along. One thing to note though, if your displacement map, so this render here inside Maya, if it doesn't look good, like it's completely messed up, doesn't necessarily mean that the mesh or the retopo mesh is broken. It's more likely not that. So before you give up, let's take a look at it in class. Before we give up, it's most likely just the export settings. When you're exporting outside of ZBrush, or when you're exporting any sort of displacement maps are very, very extremely high quality map. So any sort of errors or any sort of, if the export settings here don't match what it is inside Maya, it's going to look very, very wrong. like completely broken. It's either going to be super skinny and kind of disappearing, or it's going to be like a big bubble monster type thing. So if it looks like that, it doesn't really mean that your mesh is wrong. It's probably just you've entered the details in wrong and you've just applied it incorrectly. But try your best to set this up. I'll go through this again. So it's just a standard surface. And if you haven't used the Hypershade before, I'm sure you have, it's a pretty standard tool, but it's just up here in Windows, rendering Hypershade. And we're using the standard Arnold surface. So you can find that over here in Arnold's shader. And it's this one. Okay, it should come with this node and this one here. Okay, so this gets applied to the model. We need to have a normal map node, so you can just press tab and type normal. Normal. And it's this one. The file, you can just drag and drop the file into this panel here, and it should come in with just this and this. Make sure that you change the color space to raw. The out node goes into the input. The out value of the normal map goes into normal cameras. This one here is the displacement. Make sure you change the color space to raw, and the out color goes into this one here. And these are just my lights. Again, you can just use whatever lights. You really just need to see that it's working. It doesn't need to look good. You just need to know that's the way it works. Okay, so I hope that helped. I'll see you guys in the next one.